Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 mini series with the New York Yankees. And we are at the All-Star break in 2024. The Yankees having a bit better season than they did a year ago when the team missed the playoffs and was barely 500. We've got some goals from ownership. We've already extended Juan Soto, which was an important goal of ours. Need to build a top 6 farm system over the next 3 years. We've got a lot of work to do that, and quite honestly, with where we'll be drafting, I think it's going to be pretty difficult to do. This year, the goal is to reach the playoffs. I don't know that this Yankees team is really a world championship type squad, but I certainly would rather be in the playoffs than not in the playoffs. So we are going to try to do what we can to get there, but we are going to be thinking a little bit more about the medium term than the near term with this team, because when I look at our contracts for next season, we've got a lot of holes to fill on this team. A lot of important players are not signed for the long term, and then the top 5 players that we do have signed, Judge, Cole, Stanton, Soto, and Rodon, are all signed for the medium to long term, and they are all making massive amounts of money. So in those 5 players, that's going to be the vast majority of our budget. The hope is that 4 of the 5 are pretty productive. Stanton this year is hitting .224. He does have 21 home runs, so it hasn't been a complete disaster. But that contract, I think, is untradeable. Soto, I'm pretty confident that will be a good contract for us. It's through his mid to late 20s, and he's pretty young at this point and pretty productive. Rodon, Cole, and Judge are going to be the 3 contracts that really determine what we can do with this team. If those 3 players in general remain healthy and productive, they may not necessarily every year live up to the value of those contracts, but they'll at least give us something. If those players overall become injury prone and or ineffective and or age early, it could be a challenging playthrough for us, because despite the fact that we've got a lot of guys who are going to be free agents this upcoming offseason, when we look at our front office, we're not going to have a massive amount of money available next year. So we're going to need to be pretty thoughtful about who we bring back and how we position this team for the future. And generally, when I begin a new OOTP game in the year that is the real year, in this case 2024, my goal is just to get through that first season as quickly as possible. You're typically starting in March. You're not going to be able to make significant changes to the team before the season gets started. Players are signed. The free agents who are left are generally lower quality, although certainly this year we've got some big names like Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery who were out there at the beginning of this playthrough that we didn't really have the money to go after. But my goal is really to get through that first season of OOTP, and then in that first full off season is when I really start to put my own imprint on the franchise. This team here is still Brian Cashman's Yankees. This offseason is when we're going to start turning them into Old School Sports Yankees. And thinking about that, we do have a trade offer that we just made that was accepted by the Giants. We're going to be sending away the minor league center fielder, Brandon Lockridge. Good defensive player, good speed. The bat just isn't quite major league level. He's 27 years old, not an important part of our future. And we're also going to ship Alex Verdugo away, who the Yankees just signed this past offseason. And he's been productive for us in a kind of a 4th outfielder role, hitting .311, 12 doubles, 4 homers, and 167 at-bats, a 114 WRC+, competent defensive outfielder who's a durable left-handed hitter. But he is a free agent after this season, and he's looking for about $10 million a year going forward. For a 4th outfielder, given the fact that between Judge and Stanton and Soto, we already have over $100 million a year. devoted to outfielders, and we really don't have a guy who can play center field among them. And honestly, although Verdugo's listed as a center fielder right now, he's certainly a better left or right fielder. So I don't think Verdugo is a big part of our future. The other thing is that he has that disruptive personality and some negative personality traits with the low leadership, loyalty, and work ethic. When I play OOTP, if I've got a player with a personality like this, he's a prima donna who is hard to get along with. The only ways I'm generally going to have those players in my clubhouse is if they are a star or a superstar player, or perhaps if they are a rookie or an inexperienced player making the major league minimum who's going to well outperform the contract that they have. And I don't think either of those conditions apply to Verdugo. So we're not going to re-sign him, and we don't really want him in the clubhouse anyways because of some of the negative influences. So what we proposed to the Giants was to pick up the left-handed pitcher Taylor Rogers, a good solid left-handed relief pitcher. He's making $12 million a year, which is very costly. But if we include Verdugo to help them with their playoff push this year, as well as Lockridge, they're willing to keep 80% of his contract. So that makes it a very palatable deal for us this year. And it also gives us a good, proven, left-handed major league reliever to be on our team next year. And we are going to have a good amount of turnover in our pitching staff next year, particularly the bullpen. Clay Holmes, our closer, is the most established reliever of the bunch, but he's looking for $15 million a year. That is probably not a number that we're going to be able to handle unless we're able to trade away Stanton. Those of you who watched my tutorial yesterday, taking a first look at the trade settings in OOTP 25, will know how difficult it is to potentially trade away Stanton, which makes sense because it's one of the worst contracts in baseball. But for the heck of it, we're going to shop him around right now, and if we retain 60% of that contract, which I'm not sure we really want to, you can see here that there's still nothing we can get back in trade for him, even at this trade setting. So given that we're going to be stuck with Stanton's contract probably through this entire playthrough, there's a chance when it gets closer to being finished, particularly if we're maybe able to use the new player development lab and increase his strength and get him a little healthier. I don't know how possible that is, but it may be something we look at this offseason. But I don't think we're going to be able to get out of Stanton anywhere in the near term. And because of that, as a team that only potentially has about $26 million to spend next offseason, I think we're probably going to unfortunately have to be moving on from Mr. Holmes. So I'm not necessarily bringing Rogers here with the thought that he's our closer next year, but it is conceivable and a possibility. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to complete this trade. Verdugo is gone. And you can see Clubhouse secretly appreciates that we cut ties with Verdugo. Not really anyone's complaining that he's left, widely regarded as a negative influence in the locker room. So I think this is a win-win for us. We only were going to have Verdugo for another 2.5 months anyways. He was really playing primarily as a fourth outfielder for us. We do have Jason Dominguez now in AAA, who's started a rehab assignment, and I think actually completed the rehab assignment at this point from his injury from last season, so we can bring him up if we want to. I think he probably needs a little more seasoning, so we may end up waiting until September to bring him up. But I think we'll be able to replace what Verdugo did for us. We weren't going to sign him anyways. We've cleared a negative presence out of the locker room, and we also have a very cost-effective reliever for us in Taylor Rogers next year, where the Giants are going to be paying the vast majority of his contract, which, given some of the parameters that we're operating under here with those 5 giant contracts, is actually going to be something that's important to the Yankees and probably not the only time you're going to see me making a trade like this over the next few seasons. And for those of you who happen to be newer to the game, maybe just picked it up in the last couple of days, who are following along and trying to maybe learn a little bit about the game, first of all, if you fit that category, appreciate you watching. And even if you're a longtime viewer, appreciate you watching as well. But we just got an offer for the Red Sox, and it's just a reminder to always take what your assistant GM, who in our case is now the recently demoted Brian Cashman, has to say about trades. The Red Sox, before the season started, signed Blake Snell to a one-year deal. So he is going to be a free agent after this season. And they are suggesting that they'll let us rent him if we give up Jahmai Jones, Spencer Jones, who's one of the top prospects in our system, as well as Roderick Arias, who's also a very good glove prospect. So couple of the better prospects in the entire Yankees organization, plus a guy who certainly could have a role for us in the coming years as a utility infielder, particularly next year when we look to turn this team over for an admittedly good pitcher, but still a rental, given that we're in decent position right now to ensure we're in the playoffs. 57-47 record. We're 2 games up on the final wild card spot. I don't think we're going to make a huge push in terms of trying to win it all this year. The goal is just to get the team into the playoffs, get a little playoff experience for some of the newer players, keep Hal Steinbrenner happy, and then really try to position this team for the future in the offseason. So to me, getting rid of a couple of players to bring on a rental pitcher doesn't make a lot of sense, particularly since Snell very well could be a free agent this offseason, and we might be able to get him for free. Now, it's conceivable that they trade him to somebody else, and that team signs him to a long-term extension, and he's not back on the market. If that's the case, we'll deal with the consequences in the offseason. There's plenty of other pitchers out there we can look to add, and quite honestly, although our rotation is not great, I think we're going to have a little more of a need in terms of relievers than in starters this upcoming offseason anyways. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, you can see who the popular players in our organization are. We're getting offers for Jahmai Jones and Spencer Jones, offer for Roderick Arias, another offer for Roderick Arias. We talked through the offer that we got last week. Don't think I'm going to be trading any youngsters away. We're getting very close to the trade deadline now, just 3 days away. We're only a game behind in the East. Now we could be third place in the East very easily. Toronto, the Orioles, and our Yankees squad have had a good battle this year, but with Tampa Bay and Boston both having a bit of down seasons, still feeling pretty comfortable that ultimately we can slide this team into the playoffs without investing a lot of additional resources into this year at the expense of the future. And there certainly is some temptation as we head closer to the trade deadline, though. We fortunately have Juan Soto locked up in this universe, but I know that a lot of my friends who are Mets fans are anxiously awaiting this coming offseason when they think that the Mets may be prying Juan Soto away from the Yankees. So for those of you who are my Mets friends who are watching, there is part of me that's inclined to trade for Pete Alonso, who's now on the trade block, and sign him to a long-term contract just to spite you. But he's not really what we need at this point. I don't know who our first baseman is going to be next year, because we'll probably be moving on from Rizzo, another guy who's looking to make some money next year. And that is, fortunately for this Yankees team option that we have. Rizzo hitting .212 with 15 homers, 54 ribbies. Hard to imagine I'll exercise that option in the offseason, which will open up another $17 million. But Spencer Jones, who's been talked about as a guy who conceivably could be a first baseman for us in the not-so-distant future. And honestly, with the likes of Judge, Stanton, Soto, we can probably create a first baseman out of some of our corner outfielder / DHs down the line if we really needed to. I don't think that's the way we'll go. We've been able to keep Stanton somewhat healthy this year by DHing him regularly. not having a monster year by any stretch, but it's a better season than he had in 2023. With the fact that we're really not going to put him out in the outfield at all unless absolutely necessary. Taking a look at his fielding stats for the seasons, you can see he's only played one game in the outfield this year. And if we can keep it to maybe just one more game these last couple months of the season, I think that would probably be a positive thing. And as we get ready for the trade deadline and to likely do nothing, we're feeling really good about our team. Carlos Rodon just no-hit the Philadelphia Phillies earlier today. So that puts us in a position where we are 61-49 as we get ready for the trade deadline. Tied for second with the Blue Jays, a game and a half behind the surging Orioles, who have won 6 in a row. Us and the Blue Jays are up 3 games on the Twins and the Twins for the final playoff spot in the American League, and then the Twins are up another 2 games on the Mariners for that last spot. So we got a 5-game gap between where we are now and potentially being out of the playoffs. So don't think we're going to really do anything. It's going to be a very busy off season for us. But as I said, my goal is to sneak this team into the playoffs by the smallest margin possible and have as much of a clean slate without having given up any of the relatively average minor league resources that we have to start this rebuild or this change of the Yankees in earnest starting in November. And we've simmed ahead to mid-August. The Yankees struggling a bit, 3-7 in our last 10. We've lost 3 in a row, so we're now in third place, 4 games out in the division. Still holding on to that final wild card, 3.5 up on the Red Sox, 4 up on the Rays, who are playing very well of late. So hopefully we can do well over these next few weeks as we approach the roster expansion. We've got a series coming up with Cleveland, who happen to have the best record in the American League at this point, so that certainly won't be easy. But hopefully we can get into September at least 10 games over 500 and have ourselves in a position where we've got a magic number that's somewhere in the high teens as we get into September. And we've been playing better this week, which is good. We took out 2 out of 3 at home against the first place Guardians, and then we just won the first 2 games of the final series in the homestand against the Rockies, which is very positive. But a guy that we were talking about not that long ago, Giancarlo Stanton, ruptured his Achilles, and he is going to be out for 7 months. So his season is over. Hopefully he will be ready, just ready for the beginning of next season. I don't know if he'll get in a full spring training. So we knew that this contract was going to be a problem, and we knew that his injury proneness was a potential issue. We tried to baby him as much as possible, just playing him at DH. Got 123 games out of him, so he was an everyday player for us. Finished the year hitting .233, 29 homers, 68 ribbies. Did put up a 105 WRC plus, so he was an above-average offensive player. Certainly with the contract he's making, we're hoping more than being a little bit above average. We'll see in the offseason whether there's a way to get out of this contract, get out of some of this money. You can see there are a number of teams that he would consider moving to. It's just a matter of how much of the contract we'll have to eat and likely what resources we'll have to give up with him to get a good chunk of that contract off the books. But that's certainly I don't want to say it's the number one priority for us in the off season, but it's certainly a priority that we'll be investigating if there's any way to move on from a good chunk of that contract and start 2025 with a bit more of a clean slate on our books. And with Stanton done for the year, we've promoted Austin Wells. He had a big year for us in AAA, 361 average, 38 homers, 88 ribbies. Only wanted him on the major league team if we were going to be able to play him every day, and certainly with Stanton gone, that gives us an opportunity to hopefully get him some meaningful playing time these last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Christopher Familia, is who we brought up when we made the trade that we talked about earlier at the beginning of the episode when we moved on from Verdugo, and you can see he's hitting 207 and 29 at-bats, playing just occasionally for our Yankees squad. And we've made it to September roster expansion. Unfortunately for us, the playoff race is getting pretty tight at this point. Not a ton of great options for us to bring up. We did set September roster expansion to 30 rather than 28 to make it a little bit more like the old days. Brought up Ron Marinaccio and Clayton Beeter, both of whom had spent the entire year in AAA. In the case of Marinaccio, also spent some time recovering from an injury. Everyday players, we did bring up the infielder Jahmai Jones as well as center fielder Greg Allen. We decided to keep the Martian down in AAA. He just doesn't look like he's quite ready to face major league pitching yet. Hitting just 220 with 11 homers and 273 at-bats in Scranton this season, 70 WRC plus. So despite the great, very short stints he had with Scranton and the Yankees a year ago, feel like it's better for him to play every day these last few days of the AAA season down there, and then maybe he'll make the team out of camp in spring training next year. And as I mentioned, the AL East and the playoff race has gotten a lot tighter. We are in second, 2 games behind, but the Rays and the Orioles are now both just half a game behind us. So we are half a game up on the Rays and the Orioles for the last playoff spot in the American League. And the Red Sox and the Astros are both lurking 2.5 games behind. So it looks like there's the 4 AL East teams plus the Astros fighting for those last couple of wild card spots. So it's going to be an interesting battle here in September. And another pretty significant injury for the Yankees. Nestor Cortes going to be out for the rest of this year and through part of next year, most likely 7 to 8 months with shoulder inflammation. Finished the year 6-9 with a 4.71 ERA. So not necessarily a great year for him, but certainly would have preferred to see what he could do over this last month of the season as we try to hang on to a wild card spot. And our Yankees are collapsing here in September. We've lost 6 in a row, a 1-9 record over our last 10, and we've fallen all the way to last place in the American League East. The only thing we do have going for us is that we're only 4.5 games out of first. It's a very tight division. Every team has a winning record, but we've fallen back to 2.5 out of the wild card over the last week with this long losing streak since we lost Mr. Cortes. So definitely going to be an interesting last few weeks of the season for our Yankees team. Got a big series at home against Boston coming up and a big series against Baltimore at home as well. I believe the schedule ends in September this year, but just going to double check that. So those are the key divisional games. Fortunately for us, they're all at home. Also going to need to take care of matters against Kansas City, Seattle, Oakland, and Pittsburgh. So it's not the worst schedule with Oakland and Pittsburgh and Kansas City being some lower-rated teams, but still definitely not in the position that we hoped we would be here on September 9th. Definitely falling apart a bit over this second half of the year, particularly in this month of September. And another very mediocre week in the books for the Yankees. We lost 2 out of 3 at home against Kansas City, and then we split the series at home against Boston despite taking the first 2 games. Definitely not what we were looking for. We're now 5 out in the division and only 2 games over 500, which is where we were a year ago. 3 games out of the wild card spot at this point, and there's a lot of teams that we need to jump by. So we've put ourselves in a tough situation. We talked earlier that we weren't really necessarily trying as hard as we could to win this season, but would have loved to get things off on a good foot with the owner goals with Hal Steinbrenner by reaching the playoffs. And right now, with 12 games left in the season, we're probably going to need to go 10-2 to have any chance of getting into the playoffs, which is not impossible, but certainly not easy. And the only good news over the past week was that Aaron Judge hit his 300th home run. It was another very mediocre week for the Yankees. We lost 2 out of 3 in Seattle, then we won 2 out of 3 in Oakland. So it was a 500 week. We've only got 6 games left at this point. 85 wins is the most that we can get. We're 7 games behind in the division, so we're already eliminated in the division. And we're almost eliminated for the wild card spot. We're 5 games behind the Blue Jays at this point. Basically, we've got to be perfect the rest of the way and hope for a lot of help. And although we did win 5 of our last 6 and finish the season feeling a little better about ourselves with 5 wins in a row, still too little too late. We'll not be going to the playoffs this year. 84-78 is a very slight improvement from a year ago. Fortunately, we did at least hold off the Red Sox to keep Boston in last in the American League East. But when all was said and done, we were 3 games out of that final wild card spot. Taking a look at our team statistics, we ended up middle of the pack, 9th in runs scored, middle of the pack, 9th in runs allowed. Our 84-78 record was actually 2 games better than Pythagorean expectations. As we talked about, really kind of fell apart over the second half of the year. We were in good shape around the All-Star break, but a 500 team in July, 11-15 in August, and 12-14 in September. As I talked about earlier, my goal was just to get through this first season and get to the first off season, which is where I enjoy things the most and I have the most fun as someone who likes to play primarily as a general manager. That being said, I obviously wanted to get into the playoffs. I would certainly prefer to be competitive than not, and we've already upset ownership by missing out on reaching the playoffs. So hopefully the extension we signed with Juan Soto and the small amount of progress we've made so far this year improving our farm system will keep Mr. Steinbrenner thinking well of us. And taking a look at our leaderboards, Arson, or Aaron Judge, led the league with 47 homers, and Juan Soto was third with 41. Judge led the league with 113 ribbies, Volpe with 39 steals and 27 homers, still struggling to keep that batting average above the Mendoza line. Soto second in the league in OPS and third in batter WAR, so glad to have him on the team. Clark Schmidt ended up third in the league with a 3.66 ERA. Rodon led the league with 241 strikeouts, and Clay Holmes had 40 saves, which was good for third in the league. Over in the National League, oh boy, the Dodgers fans are going to love seeing this. Ohtani, 68 home runs, playing every day his first season in Los Angeles, and he also put up a wacky 171 runs driven in for that powerful Dodgers team. 97 wins from the Dodgers was the second most in baseball, behind only the Phillies. Certainly well off of their over-under, but still a solid season from the Dodgers. Ohtani led the league with an 8.3 batter WAR. ERA-wise, Aaron Nola at 2.74 had the lowest earned run average in the National League. So the season is over. We'll find out who's going to win the World Series this year. I agree with, I think it was P.F. Holden mentioned in one of his recent videos on OOTP 25, it seems like the game really likes the Rangers. They have been a World Series team, and I think the World Series winner in most of the brief permutations of this game that I've played around with over the past couple of days, and they are back in the playoffs this year. We'll find out in a bit who ends up winning the 2024 World Series. We know it won't be the Yankees. And it doesn't always happen in real baseball, and it certainly doesn't always happen in OOTP. But this year, the Philadelphia Phillies, the 106-win team, the best team in baseball, had some challenges along the way. Every series went to a deciding game, but they took out the Braves 3-2. They took out the Giants 4-3, and then they won the World Series against the Minnesota Twins 4-3. So the Philadelphia Phillies are your 2024 World Series champions. So we have made it to the off-season. We've got the team option on Rizzo to decide. He ended up hitting .215, 24 homers, 78 ribbies. Garrett Cole has decided to not opt out of his contract after going 13-14 with a 4.62 ERA. Also have options on Luke Weaver and Lou Trevino. Budget of $356 million for next year, which I believe is about where we were. New goals: play .500 ball, improve our ERA, sign Clay Holmes, find a top prospect, and then we still want to build a top 6 minor league system and reach the World Series going forward. Our scouting director, Damon Oppenheimer, retired, which is a huge blow because we've just spent this whole first season scouting everyone in our organization, and now we're reliant on the OSA for everybody as we get ready for free agency in a few weeks. So certainly not optimal there, but at least we'll get to pick our own scouting director going forward. The off-season is underway. We're going to have some busy decisions to make in arbitration. We've also been looking at what looks like a pretty interesting class of international amateur free agents. So hopefully we'll be able to bring on a top prospect that will help us several years down the line. Thinking about next season, the goal is certainly to have this team in the playoffs next year. We will have some money to spend, but we're going to have a lot of big decisions to make with the team option on Rizzo, and then the likes of Torres, Holmes, Conley, Liziga, Caleb Ferguson, and Dennis Santana potentially headed to free agency. We got those other 2 team options I talked about, as well as a lot of guys heading to their arbitration years, some of whom, particularly the likes of Trent Grisham and Nestor Cortez, are starting to make some pretty decent money for what they are. We kind of need Grisham as that defensive center fielder, but we're going to have some interesting decisions to make, so it's going to be a fun off season. The first thing we're going to need to do is to find a scouting director. I'm going to check on that right now before we finish off the episode. Guessing we may have some other positions open. Actually, that's the only one in the whole organization. We haven't spent any time on our coaching. We're just going to kind of churn through and hopefully improve the team as people come up. So only one hole to fill, but it's definitely a massive one as our scouting director. And there are some pretty big-time scouts out there. Looks like Gary Bluin is the best of the highly favored tools guys. I think he's probably the direction that we would go. Maybe there's an argument to be a little less focused on a highly favored tools guy for a short-term play like we're doing here, where building up a farm system is not really going to matter too much because we're probably going to be moving on from this series within a couple of weeks when we begin our long play in OOTP 25. That said, Bluin's pretty good, outstanding with internationals, excellent with majors, and he's still good in the minors and good with the amateurs. I think it probably makes sense to consider bringing him on board. Looking for $535,000 a year. We'll see if we can sign him for a bit less to save a little bit of money. We'll offer him $450,000 over 5 years. So we've got an offer out there to Mr. Bluin to join our team. Looking again at the highlights, Judge, Soto, and Stanton drove in a lot of runs, or hit a lot of home runs. Judge and Soto plus Rizzo were our RBI leaders. Volpe and Soto were the most efficient guys on the base paths, or maybe not the most efficient, but the most active in terms of success. Cole did give us 200 innings. Rodon, as we talked about, led the league in strikeouts. Cole not too far behind him. Cole, taking a look at his profile, it's certainly still an above average pitching profile. I don't know if it's a $36 million a year pitching profile at this point, but since he's opted into his contract, it is what it is, and we will be building around him. Certainly think we've got a little bit of money to spend, which is a positive thing, but it's not an excessive amount of money. Certainly still think if there's a way as we begin the postseason to get out from that Giancarlo Stanton contract, that would be a obvious lever for us to try to press. I'm guessing with the difficult trade setting that we're on that there's not going to really be much of anything for him. If we retain 50%, you can see there's absolutely no interest at all. Even if we bump that up to 75%, we can get Yu Darvish, who's got a bad contract that lasts just as long, not quite as much money, but all of the savings that we would be getting from moving on from Stanton's contract would be more than overcome by taking on Darvish's contract. So we're just going to have to live with Stanton. I guess in the offseason I'll be able to explore what we can get if we include a big-time prospect with him. Might be the right move given that we're only going to play a few seasons here. I don't want to kind of rob the future for today, but it would certainly be a lot more interesting in terms of my ability to tweak this roster if we're able to open up some of that money that we are spending on Giancarlo right now. So our first goal of the offseason is going to be to get a new scout signed and then to try to re-scout our entire organization and the entire world, particularly upcoming free agents, as efficiently as possible. And while we're doing that, we're going to have some decisions to make on a bunch of arbitration-eligible players and a bunch of potential free agents. So it's going to be a busy off-season for these Yankees. The goal is to certainly get this team back into the playoffs next year. The big decision is going to be, is there a way for us to get Stanton off of the books? And then what do we do with Rizzo? Maybe do we trade away LeMahieu? What do we do with the Grisham and Cortez options? A lot of interesting decisions for us this offseason, and we'll be tackling them all in our next episodes. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.